I walked into the house that night with a smile, the bag of cookies from my parents still warm in my hands. The scent of chocolate and sugar clung to my coat, comforting me as I slipped off my shoes. The dining room lights glowed softly, and for a moment, I felt the calm of home. But the second I stepped closer, my heart sank. Mark was at the table, his face carved in stone, and sitting across from him, Jenna, his ex. My stomach tightened like a fist. I blinked, certain I was imagining it. "What's going on? Why are you both here?" My voice cracked, caught between disbelief and the hope this was some kind of sick joke. Mark didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. His hand pressed against a stack of papers, neat and deliberate. My eyes darted to them, dread already whispering what they were. Then he shoved them across the table, the scrape of paper on wood cutting through me sharper than any blade. "Sit down. Sign these. It's divorce." His words were ice, steady and final. The cookies trembled in my grip before I set them down, untouched. My mind spun, screaming for an explanation. Divorce? Now? Like this? The silence swallowed me whole as the weight of betrayal filled the room. I shook my head slowly, as if that alone could rewind time. Divorce? Why now? Why like this? My voice wavered, but I forced myself to meet his eyes. They were cold, detached, like I was just another task to cross off his list. Mark didn't hesitate. "I never loved you. I only married you because I was lonely. Jenna and I are back together. You need to sign and leave this house." Each word landed like a stone to my chest. The world blurred for a moment. My legs felt weak, but I stayed standing, gripping the back of a chair for balance. Jenna leaned forward, her lips curling in that smug little smile I'll never forget. "Don't drag this out, Stacy. Just accept it." Her voice was syrupy and sharp, dripping with triumph. I wanted to scream, to throw those papers in her face, but my body stayed rigid, my heart pounding louder than my thoughts. I stared at both of them, the man I built a life with and the woman I thought belonged to the past. My hands trembled as I reached for the pen, the weight of betrayal crushing me from every side. My chest burned, my throat tight, but I forced the tip to the paper. I signed. And as the ink bled across my name, something inside me shifted, something they were too blind to notice. I lifted my eyes to Mark's face as the pen left the page. He didn't even notice the fire building in me. He was too busy convincing himself this was victory. Jenna leaned back in her chair, smirking like she'd already won some prize. My fingers pressed hard against the papers, leaving small creases. They thought they'd broken me. They thought this was the end. Inside, though, something uncoiled. The hurt was raw, yes, but beneath it was a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. I let my gaze lock onto Mark's, memorizing every line of his expression, every ounce of arrogance. He mistook my silence for surrender. That was his first mistake. Jenna giggled softly, her hand brushing his, and I knew they both believed I'd just walk away quietly. I pushed the pen across the table, my hands steady now, my pulse calmer than it should have been. Neither of them saw the shift, the promise settling into my bones. I stood, slowly, carefully, holding myself taller than before. They thought they had ended me, but they had only lit the fuse, and the fire they started would follow them into every corner of their lives. The room was thick with silence after my signature, but I made sure my hands didn't shake when I set the pen down. I could feel both of their eyes on me, waiting for tears, for begging, for collapse. Instead, I straightened my shoulders and looked at them with a calm they didn't deserve. "You think you've won," I said, steady and low. "But this isn't the end. I'll make sure you regret every word you said tonight." Mark chuckled, the sound hollow and mocking. He leaned back in his chair like I was nothing more than a child throwing a tantrum. "You? What could you possibly do?" His laughter echoed in my ears, cruel and careless. Jenna rolled her eyes, her voice sharp as glass. Pathetic. Empty threats. Their arrogance wrapped around the room, smothering any trace of doubt they thought I still had. I didn't bother arguing. I let their words hang in the air, feeding the fire already burning in me. My chest ached with hurt, but under it was something sharper. Resolve. As I picked up my coat, I leaned closer, whispering just loud enough for them to hear. Not threats. Promises. Then I walked out of that house, stripped of my marriage, stripped of my dignity in their eyes, but walking away with something far more dangerous. The night air hit me like a slap as I stepped outside, but I welcomed the sting. It reminded me I was still standing. My breath came out in clouds, sharp and uneven, but with every step away from that house, my stride grew firmer. Behind me, laughter drifted faintly through the walls, their voices tangling together. They thought they had erased me with a signature, but they didn't know the storm they'd just set free. I replayed every word Mark had thrown at me, letting them carve deep lines into my memory. I never loved you. I only married you because I was lonely. Each syllable burned, each sentence fueled the anger rising inside me, and Jenna, with her smug little smirk, thinking she'd walked back into a fairy tale ending. They didn't realize those words weren't crushing me. They were sharpening me. I walked faster, clutching my coat tighter, the chill now mixing with a fire spreading through my veins. It wasn't rage without direction. It was focus, cold and precise. I didn't know yet how I'd do it, or when, but I knew this. I would not be their victim. I wouldn't disappear into silence. One day they'd choke on the arrogance of this night. That much I promised myself. By the time I reached my car, my tears had dried before they could even fall. I wasn't broken. I was awake. The leather of the steering wheel felt cold beneath my palms as I sat there in the dark, my heart pounding steady now, almost calm. The life I'd just lost replayed in fragments. Our wedding day, our dinners together, the quiet mornings over coffee. And then his words sliced through it all, reminding me it had all been built on lies. I whispered into the silence, my voice shaking but certain. This isn't over. You'll regret underestimating me. It wasn't a threat. It was a vow. In that moment, I wasn't the woman who had been ambushed at her own table. I wasn't the wife discarded like yesterday's paper. I was something new, something fiercer. And the beauty of it was, they hadn't seen it coming. I started the engine, the hum breaking the stillness around me. As I pulled away, the house shrank in my rearview mirror, but the weight of what had happened didn't fade. It settled deeper, rooting itself into my bones. They thought I'd walk away quietly, broken and forgotten. But I was already planning, already imagining the cracks I could carve into their shiny new world, and soon, those cracks would spread. In the weeks that followed, I learned the art of silence. To Mark and Jenna, I became invisible, just a ghost slipping through the motions of rebuilding my life. But invisibility has its perks. No one notices when you're watching closely. At work, I buried myself in projects, staying late, saying yes to opportunities. When the promotion came, I smiled politely, but inside I felt the first taste of control returning. I expanded my circle too, new friends, new dinners, new conversations that didn't revolve around what I'd lost. And yet, every laugh I shared, every glass of wine I clinked, carried an undercurrent of purpose. Each move I made wasn't just about living again, it was about laying a foundation for what was coming. Mark thought he'd written me out of his story, but I was quietly writing the sequel. It was during one of those long nights at the office that I stumbled across something, small, almost hidden. A discrepancy in a file tied to Mark's business. I stared at it for a long while, my pulse quickening. It wasn't much, just a thread, but I knew how threads worked. You pull carefully, patiently, and eventually, the whole thing unravels. And that's when I realized my revenge had just found its starting point. I began keeping a notebook, plain and nondescript, tucked deep inside my desk drawer. Every little detail about Mark went into it. Dates, names, transactions, even casual comments overheard through mutual acquaintances. To anyone else, it would have looked like scattered nonsense. To me, it was a map. And with every line I wrote, the picture grew sharper, the edges of his carefully polished life starting to fray in my mind. When my best friend asked why I hadn't just moved on, I gave her a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Why don't you just forget him?" she pressed, her tone full of worry. I took a slow sip of my wine before answering. Because forgetting isn't enough. They humiliated me in my own home. I'll take everything he's so proud of, piece by piece. She gasped softly, but she didn't argue. She knew better than to try. In the quiet of my apartment, I would sit with the notebook, tracing over the words as if they were sacred. Each entry wasn't just information, it was a brick, and brick by brick I was building the walls of their downfall. The beauty of it all was that they had no clue. To them, I was just the discarded wife, nursing her wounds. To me, I was a strategist, patient, and relentless. The more I uncovered, the more intoxicating it became. Mark had always prided himself on being meticulous, the kind of man who thought he was smarter than everyone else. But I knew him too well. I knew his shortcuts, his blind spots, the corners he cut when he thought no one was paying attention. And now, I wasn't just paying attention. I was collecting every slip, every lie, like pearls on a string. At work, he still looked polished from the outside, shaking hands, smiling wide. But behind that smile were numbers that didn't add up and whispers of deals that wouldn't withstand daylight. Each document I copied, each email I saved, felt like another crack in the mask he wore so confidently. I wasn't rushing. I was savoring it, letting the power of patience sharpen my blade. And in the middle of it all, I found myself breathing easier. My life was expanding. New successes, new friendships, new laughter, but always with a quiet undercurrent of focus. I was building myself back up, not just to heal, but to strike. Mark and Jenna lived as if they'd won. What they didn't know was that their victory was already rotting from the inside, and I was the one feeding the decay. It started small, just a whisper here, a rumor there. I never signed my name, never left a trace. But I knew exactly where to place the seeds so they'd take root. At his office, I let slip the inconsistencies I'd found, sending anonymous tips through the right channels. Soon enough, the polished shine of his reputation began to dull. Colleagues who once trusted him now traded cautious glances, suspicion dripping into every handshake. I pictured him walking into work, carrying himself with that same arrogant swagger, unaware that the floor beneath him was softening with every step. My reports weren't dramatic. They were quiet, surgical, designed to cut slowly. And as the days passed, I heard from mutual friends that questions were being asked, questions Mark didn't have clean answers for. Each one chipped away at his credibility like cracks in glass. Meanwhile, I turned my attention to Jenna. I didn't need to invent lies. His past had plenty of truth for me to use. Old flings, secret flirtations, the kind of stories that had always been swept under the rug. I made sure she heard them, not directly from me, but in casual whispers, late-night texts from concerned friends, hints that slipped through the cracks of conversation. I didn't have to touch her trust. I only had to tilt it. It didn't take long before the cracks widened. One evening, I heard from a friend that Jenna had shown up at Mark's office, furious. She'd confronted him in front of coworkers, her voice slicing through the glass walls. "I heard you've been flirting with someone from your office. Is it true?" she demanded, her words dripping with accusation. Mark snapped back, "It's gossip, don't listen to that." But the damage was done. The doubt had already lodged itself in her chest. I could almost see her face in that moment. Lips tight, eyes narrowed, replaying every smirk, every late night he couldn't explain. "Funny," she'd said, her voice lower now. "Everyone seems to know, but me." That line reached me through the grapevine, and I savored it like a fine glass of wine. Jenna was unraveling, and Mark's arrogance was only speeding it along. At the same time, my carefully curated tips had finally landed in the right inbox. I heard whispers of investigations, quiet reviews of Mark's financial dealings at work. He probably thought it was random, maybe just bad luck. But luck had nothing to do with it. Every thread I pulled was tightening around his neck, and soon the whole fabric of his life would tear apart. News of Mark's struggles traveled fast, and I let myself enjoy each update like a secret feast. His colleagues began distancing themselves, meetings suddenly held without him, clients asking for someone else to handle their accounts. At night, I imagined him pacing their living room, snapping at Jenna as she demanded answers. The very walls that had once watched me break were now echoing with their arguments. Jenna's insecurities grew louder, feeding on the rumors I'd planted and the truths I'd uncovered. She questioned him constantly, and Mark, never one to handle pressure with grace, lashed out in return. Their fairy tale reunion was crumbling, not with a bang, but with the slow grind of mistrust. And I didn't have to be there to see it. I knew exactly how those fights sounded, how those silences stretched. As for me, I kept my distance, my hands clean, my smile calm. No one suspected the woman they dismissed as broken was the same one pulling the strings. I watched their life tilt further off balance, knowing the cracks would only deepen. And soon, those cracks wouldn't just weaken them, they would swallow them whole. Months later, the man who once strutted through life like he owned it all was unrecognizable. Word reached me that Mark had been fired, his reputation shredded by the very evidence I'd handed over piece by piece. His savings dwindled, his debts piled up, and Jenna, predictably, packed her bags and left him. Their perfect little reunion ended the same way it began, with betrayal and arrogance. This time, though, he had nothing left to cushion the fall. I planned our final encounter carefully, not by chance but by design. I chose a cafe I knew he frequented, a place where the bitter smell of coffee always hung heavy in the air. When I walked in, I spotted him immediately. Shoulders slumped, hair unkempt, eyes hollow. He looked smaller, almost fragile, as if life had carved out every ounce of pride he once wore so boldly. I ordered my drink and let him see me, watching recognition flicker across his face. His jaw clenched, his hands curling into fists around the chipped mug. Finally he spoke, his voice low, brittle. "You did this, didn't you?" The question trembled with accusation, but underneath it was something else, fear, and hearing it gave me a satisfaction deeper than words could ever describe. I leaned back in my chair, letting a slow smile spread across my face. "I warned you," I said softly, my tone steady, almost gentle. "The day you shoved those papers in my face, I swore you'd regret it." His eyes darted down, shame flickering across his features, though he tried to mask it with bitterness. For once, Mark had no script, no defense, just the hollow weight of consequences he never thought would catch up. He shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "I lost everything." The words slipped out like a confession, each syllable heavy with defeat. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the cup, as if even the porcelain might slip away from him. Seeing him like this, stripped of the arrogance, stripped of Jenna, stripped of power, it was the justice I'd promised myself in the darkness of that night. I leaned forward, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "Exactly," I said, the satisfaction humming in my chest. "You wanted me gone. Now I'm stronger, happier, and you have nothing." His jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. He couldn't. The silence between us was more powerful than any argument he might have tried. I stood slowly, savoring the moment as the final nail settled into place. As I walked past his table, I could feel his gaze clinging to me, desperate and hollow. The man who once told me to leave with nothing now sat surrounded by the ruins of everything he had built. I didn't need to raise my voice or throw my victory in his face. The silence of my footsteps leaving him behind was louder than any words. That silence was my revenge, pure and undeniable. Outside, the cool air felt different this time, lighter, almost electric. I breathed it in deeply, letting it wash through me. I thought of the woman who had once trembled in her own dining room, pen in hand, stripped of her dignity. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone forged by betrayal, someone who had turned pain into strategy, humiliation into power, and for the first time in months, I felt free. Behind me, Mark would sit in that cafe, nursing his bitterness, haunted by what he had lost. But I didn't look back. This was never about returning to him or proving my worth in his eyes. It was about reclaiming myself and watching him unravel under the weight of his own cruelty. And as I walked away, I knew with certainty, revenge had never tasted so sweet.